Hello there, everyone. I can't see you, but I hope you're all well, and I hope this discussion is of interest to you. I'm sorry that I won't be able to listen to some of your views, but at least I'll be able to hear some of your concerns. I'm the founder and managing director of Shared Earth, which is a fair trade stroke eco business, which started in 1986 in the centre of York. It started as a small shop in Goodramgate, and then it grew, and we had several shops, and then we started wholesaling. Today we have 2 shops in York and Liverpool, and we wholesale to about 1,500 customers, mostly in the UK, but a few abroad. So that's a sort of brief synopsis of where I'm from. I'd like to introduce Ida and Sam to explain what they do. I don't feel confident to tell you myself. So can I pass through to Ida and Sam, please? Maybe Ida, you'd like to start.
Of course. Thank you so much, Jeremy. My name's Ida. Went to the University of York, but I'm here because I work at Google running retail and e-commerce for the Nordics. So I basically work with small and medium-sized advertisers across Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, helping them establish their brands online. And so I'm coming from quite a different perspective, but the most interesting part is there's a lot of kind of retail focus on how do we advertise in an ethical way, what's a sustainable company, and how can we make the most out of that, and then how do we best compete with the biggest competitors, so the Amazons and the like, for these retailers. Sam?
Yeah, thanks, Ida. So, my name's Sam Leach. I was an alumni of the University of York in 2015, I think it was. Time flies quite quickly. And I ended up staying in York. I'm from York. I studied away for a few years, and then I did a master's back in York. So, and I decided to stay here. So I set up a community interest company, a social enterprise called Spark York, which is really a meanwhile use of temporary development. It's a regeneration project in partnership with the City of York Council. But we're a standalone organisation, and we try and create meaningful commercial opportunities for startups, social enterprises, individual and unique retailers, and also community groups. And we've got a mixture of about 20 businesses that work from food and drink, retail. We've got an urban aeroponic farm. We've got workspaces, art studios, event spaces. So our model is that we try and any surplus we make gets reinvested. We're a community interest company, so we are for profit, but not for kind of shareholder profit. So anything that we make gets reinvested. But the key is about trying to unlock spaces, support retailers, create destination or a destination, and really try and collaborate and support predominantly younger aspirational entrepreneurs to set things up. So hopefully under the backdrop of ethical, socially enterprising, community-driven retail and consumerism, to use that term.
Okay, great. So thank you very much, Sam. Thank you, Ida. Kyla told us at the beginning that normally the number of participants drops off in these events, and probably half from the start. So I'm very pleased to see that it's actually gone up from 29 to 33. So if you look at that in business terms, it's an increase of at least 10%. However, we haven't got any questions yet, and so we're relying on you, the audience, to send us questions, or otherwise we'll just have to go home and I can have my lunch. So please, can you fire away with some of your questions?
Can I pose a question first, please, Jeremy? Can I claim that prerogative. Can I ask what got you about ethical consumerism, how that became, and how you came to be involved in it in the way that you are? Can I pose that question to you and then to the rest of the panel?
Yes, certainly. That's a fair enough question. When I left school, I travelled to India overland, and I was brought up near London, and I had in a sort of fairly affluent background. I'd never really travelled abroad very much. So the further I went from Europe, the standard of living changed, and people had less and less in material terms. And yet, as I came closer to India, it seemed like sometimes many people were happier and more willing to share what they had. In Afghanistan, for instance, I remember a nomad just approached me, this old man in the street, and he just came up and he had got out his rucksack on the pavement and got out this Bunsen burner or whatever it was, and sort of made me a cup of tea. And he couldn't speak English, and I couldn't, of course, speak his language. But this was just, and several things happened like that, and it made me think. When I moved into a career at a later age, I wanted somehow to repay that hospitality and show that I was concerned about the inequalities in the world. So that's how the reasoning behind Shared Earth and how it started, I suppose. So I'm seeing there are questions coming thick and fast here. So I can't read them all out at once, but let's choose one. What's the single most important thing I can do to make a difference as a consumer? Would Sam or Ida, would you like to respond to that?
Sam, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure.
I can do. Yeah, I'll go for it. Thanks, Jeremy. It's a good question. I think we've seen it a lot in recent months. You see the adverts, I'm sure, from Google and from American Express. A lot of it is about a trend to supporting local, really, and understanding local supply chains and supporting local businesses. Now, I think that's where where things are heading in a retail sense. I think that there's been quite a mediocre commercial retail model that's kind of existed for some time, and I think that's the viability of that as a model has really struggled and struggles to replicate itself and is struggling to continue. And I think there's been a shift towards local businesses. So I think as a consumer, I think understanding and playing your part, if you like, in trying to help locally minded or locally based individuals to set things up and start things. That was very much our aim at Spark, was about trying to create practical spaces. And we don't say, I don't want to take it the wrong way by saying a space to fail, but it's about a space where people can try things out. There's an affordable spot that is semi-permanent where people can try things. So I think as a consumer, trying to understand how that can, how you can help that, how you can support it. I certainly think supporting businesses that have a kind of, a set of ethical principles. So then that could be a living wage accreditation. It could be, things like the Good Business Charter, which are about supporting, environmentally friendly and those that support employees and those that try and give back to communities. I think really as a consumer, we've got the opportunity to try and support businesses, and I think this is what happens. Customers are moving to support businesses who prioritise people, the planet, and their own values. Really, we want to associate ourselves with companies that kind of reflect in ourselves of who we are trying to be. So, I think really starting local, understanding, how that can impact, and how really post-COVID, hopefully, that the real drivers of retail and about economic growth and all these other concepts are about really local people taking control over their own spaces and places and doing things with that. And that needs support from people as well. So that would be my long-winded response to that.
To tack on to that, I think as a consumer, the most important thing is also thinking, what do you want to support? Because every time you buy from a local business, a local shop, you're kind of voting with your money. You're saying, this is something that I want to support. This is an industry that I'm interested in, or something that I want to maintain in kind of like my local area. So just taking a few moments to think, hey, the next time I'm purchasing something, where do I want to be buying from and who do I want to be supporting with this money? So I think that's something that I'm actively trying to do. And it's a small step towards becoming, I feel, an ethical consumer.
Okay, well, I've been asked to chair this meeting, but I've been asked to give my views too. But I'm not a very technical person, and somehow the question seems to have disappeared. So I can't quite recall exactly what it was. But there are some other questions here, which I think it's about what can you do as an individual to be an ethical consumer and to make choices and so on. So I would say the first most important thing is attitude, and that you're trying to do the best thing for the people, not just around you, but around the world, and of course people and planets. Yes, our global situation and the fact that we're facing global warming. Which seems to be speeding up, and climate crisis, which everyone is realizing more and more. It's absolutely vital that we tackle in whatever way we can. So there are thousands of different things, and they might be very, very small, each one, but there are lots and lots of different things. It's hard to choose one in particular that you can choose, but there are just so many different things that we can do to make things better in the world. So I've got loads of questions here, and let me just have a quick look. Some ethical shops / products are very expensive. How can we become ethical consumers without a huge budget? Sam, what would your response to that be?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's another question just flicking through them as well, which was about a typical customer. I think it's a really good point. I was having a conversation not long ago about, it was with an independent business owner, but they were saying, I worked at a national pub chain before I set up Spark. When I was studying, it was substantiating. And I often found that a lot of maybe what you would class as the less ethical businesses seem to have a more inclusive catchment of people that would spend and visit them. I mean, in I don't know, you kind of Costa Coffees and places like that, where you think you've got a national coffee chain that is got a real myriad of different people that are using it. And you've got, an independent, really locally based coffee shop, for instance, and that's struggling. So why do the local people of this area, do they not want to support that? Do they not want to, promote that? And I think for me, I wouldn't say it's an issue, but I think it's got to be on the radar that for ethical consumerism to be dominant, we have to try and do what we can to make this as financially inclusive as possible. If we price people out of the market, if we make being ethical a financial luxury and not a necessity, and a very accessible necessity for everybody, then we will get in a situation where it will become kind of quite exclusive, or it could be portrayed as being exclusive to be ethical, to have those values. So, in terms of how that can take place, I think the key is about understanding, the different levers. For us, our economic model is understanding who has money and who doesn't, and understanding how that can work. For instance, we have bars and restaurants, and they typically make more money than smaller retailers that are maybe doing crafts and arts-based things. So straight away, we can phrase it to our businesses that those that make the most, pay the most, and give most, give more back in. In terms of organisations and charities and partners we work with, whether they be homeless centres and other things, a pizza shop can sell 100 pizzas, and that can fund, every week for that shop to maybe support a homeless charity and support in that way. In terms of our events model, we have event spaces that some will pay above market rate for, bigger companies, and that will then fund community groups, resident groups, all the other things to use that space for free. So I think it's about creating a business model that keeps that as inclusive as possible. We have to, I really believe that a more ethical form of business and social business is it can be and will be the new norm, that horrible term that everyone's using at the moment, that will happen and can happen. But I think we have to make sure that it is as inclusive and as accessible as possible. And ultimately that does start often with price. So I think it's about making sure that business models, they understand how they can be viable by promoting those values and ethical principles, but also make sure that it's wholly inclusive at the same time.
Excellent. What about you, Ida?
I think maybe the biggest thing to consider is also how much research you have. So I think a lot of I don't disagree. I feel a lot of ethical shops and products are maybe expensive and maybe more than you're used to paying. But if you take the example, I don't know if anyone's heard of this company called Birdsong London, but they do a full transparent breakdown of exactly how their pricing model works. So this is everything from rent, lighting, electricity, to paying the living wage, to all of their embroiderers and seamstresses, plus then marketing, all of these things. And I think that's a really interesting way of approaching it. Of once you've broken it down and you understand where the cost is coming from, if you have the opportunity, it might seem a little bit less inhibitive when you realize why the price is the way it is. But that's not to say that, you can't shop. It's not to say that you can't shop ethically if you don't have that much disposable income. But I think it's also considering what's the most important part of your life and where can you take the most impact. So it might be for someone that buying from bulk food stores is where they want to be making their changes. For other people, it might be, can we reduce our reliance on fast fashion? So becoming an ethical consumer without a huge budget, you don't need to do an entire overhaul of how you work, how you shop. Like, this can be step by step. And also a lot of the products will be, you've got almost like a big one-off cost once you commit to it. And then once you're in there, it does become a little bit cheaper. But I think that would be the thing of just, you don't need to become ethical overnight. And I think as much as just prioritize what's important to you when you're considering buying from ethical shops and ethical products.
Okay, thanks, Ida. It may not be totally in the interests of the business that I'm running, Shared Earth, to say so, but I'd just like to take this from a different perspective. You all know the slogan reduce, reuse, recycle, and there's also another R, refuse. So that's one way of dealing with this issue, just not consuming so much. So I don't think it's just about the expense of products. It's about what products we buy. And there are so many different things that you can do. If you're concerned about global warming, then you don't have to go on holiday to Spain or wherever it happens to be abroad. You can travel to somewhere in the UK, which is better for people locally, and it reduces carbon emissions and so on. One thing that we're all concerned about is the use of plastic. So you can. I was amazed a couple of years ago when I thought Sainsbury's. Anyone from Sainsbury's there? Get this message. I thought Sainsbury's. Well, they were saying they were becoming more eco-conscious and so on, and then they stopped selling mushrooms, without a bag. So they're all in plastic, all came to be in plastic. So I just stopped buying mushrooms from Sainsbury's, and I buy things like onions and potatoes and carrots and so on that don't have a plastic bag. So that doesn't cost me anything. And there are lots of other similar things that you can do like this, which will make a difference. So that's how I respond to that question. And now I've got to. I'm really sorry I can't hear everyone's views about these things, because it'd be good to have more of a discussion. Some consumers, I'm sorry, I'm picking these rather at random, these questions. Some consumers are lost in the word sustainability because it's defined quite vaguely. Do you think it's possible to have a unified label for products, looking at which consumer can see if the product is good to buy or not for the environment? That's an interesting question. Sam, Ida, would one of you like to have a go at that one?
Sure. I mean, I'm happy to jump in to start off with. I think that I understand what you mean. So there is actually no independent way to check if a product is sustainable or not. And there's a lot of different kind of stickers and this kind of stuff. And the concern would be, so I understand why it would be a great idea to have kind of one, I don't know, UK-wide company that provides this as a check mark that, hey, they're following XYZ sustainable practices. The only concern I have with that is, having worked with some larger retailers, the focus is how can you tick those boxes at the absolute bare minimum. So like, it will be a great idea in principle, but I don't think the practice and the way it would work for larger retailers would be kind of what you expect to see from this kind of sustainable action. So on the flip side, if you think about independent businesses that do their own reviewing, what might be more useful for a consumer is if someone was able to set up this kind of independent reviewing mechanism that they can then say, hey, we're looking for these companies. This is a list of companies that we know is good. And I might be wrong, Jeremy or Sam, you might know if something like this does exist. But yeah, that's my opinion on the sustainability checkmark.
Sam?
Yeah, I wouldn't have anything specific on that to add. The only thing I would kind of want to add just slightly on this is that, you know, I'm technically, in a way, a landlord of 20 businesses. And I think the challenge, and there's a lot of these kind of type, just from looking through some of the questions, there's a lot of these that are kind of mentioned in terms of affordability and independent shops and supporting, you know, that kind of stuff. But I think that landlords have got to play their role too. There's a reason often why, you know, there's substantial challenges, and I'm sure, Jeremy, you know them well, having you know, ran several shops, is that, you know, landlords have got to take some of that pain too. You know, ourselves, and a lease arrangement that we have with our businesses is a 10% rent deduction every month if businesses can evidence certain things, such as being a living wage accredited employer, such as having a progressive procurement strategy, which sounds a bit dull, but is ultimately trying to work with suppliers on more principles than just, oh, that's cheaper than that supplier. So it's trying to think, you know, locality, how do they treat employees? You know, where are their supply chains from? How environmentally friendly, you know, are they? What do they do to involve themselves in the community? And certainly with the COVID situation, and in terms of the challenges that local businesses face, landlords have got to take that pain too. I don't really understand. I mean, we've had positions, obviously, where we've had to shut as a venue, where businesses have had to shut. Landlords should be taking that. You know, I find it quite baffling that a landlord can demand or expect full rent in trading periods where that's not possible, because that, by its very nature, forces businesses to have to, you know, offer products that are specifically intended only ever to sell as many as possible. It drives unnecessary consumerism. It drives unsustainability. Really, I think sustainability in a business sense needs to be being able to exist almost the least viable people, if you get my drift on that. It's about trying to be able to exist without having to dismiss the reason why you exist just to stay commercially in the game. It should be that you can specialize in what you want to do without that being only, we've seen it a lot here when you start reducing rents, when you start giving businesses more freedom, when they have less of the financial impacts and challenges of running a business and making that work, you see a whole host of really progressive ideas of trying to do things that are environmentally friendly, volunteering in the local community, hiring individuals that may have been unemployed for a year or whatever. You see these great things taking place, and that's only going to happen if landlords as well are prepared to take some of that pain. And if we are only ever driven by how much we can consume and how much economic growth we can make and how much profit we can make, we will always be, in my opinion, unsatisfied with the outcome. Whereas, in a way, consumerism should at its heart be ethical. At its heart should be environmentally in alignment with the resources that we have available to us. That shouldn't be the kind of gold standard. That should be the norm. And I think that's never going to happen if we just expect independent businesses alone to be able to come up with those solutions. It has to be a government level. It has to be at a property ownership level, and it has to be, really redefining what the landlord and the tenant mean to one another. And it should be about fulfilling these principles as much as, this is only for profit. For me, that's a big issue in terms of, what makes the drive to consumerism so kind of embedded. We need to kind of get away from that, and we need to make sure that economic growth is not based on how much we can consume, but really what we're trying to achieve generally. Sorry, I've maybe not answered that directly, but I think these are all holistic in terms of how they kind of relate to one another.
Okay, thanks very much, Sam. Well, I think we all want our businesses to be sustainable, so that's certainly one issue. And shared earth, by its nature, has a lot to think about with sustainability, because we're buying all kinds of different products from around the world. And quite honestly, I've just recently done a short study of different products. And there's no way, and to answer the question, there's no way that any kind of unified label could be produced, because there are just so many variations of benefits and disadvantages and so on to all kinds of materials that are used and products that exist. So, for instance, we say, yes, this coconut, products made with coconuts are very sustainable because they're not taking up any land. Coconut is eaten, so if you buy a product made from coconut shell, it's almost like a recycled product. But then you go on to wool or felt or something like that, and then you think, oh yes, it's coming from an animal, but is the animal eating food that is taking up land that could be used for something better? And you think of cotton, and you think, well, yes, cotton is sustainable, but it takes up a lot more land than bamboo, and it uses a lot of water to grow it. And you think of wooden products, and there's quite a lot of our wooden products at Shared Earth are made with a tree called albizia, which takes about 7 or 8 years to grow. So it's a softwood. It's almost like a weed in barley where we buy it from. But then there are other trees that grow in 10 years or 15 years, 20 years. And the variations of what is exactly sustainable, it's impossible to define them. So that's really, really difficult in answer to that question. You can just try to do your best, and you kind of realize that some things are not sustainable. So, for instance, if we all eat lots of meat and the rainforests have to be cut down to provide land for grazing, then that is not sustainable, and it's very much so. And I think that's something that all of us need to be dealing with, is the amount of meat that we rely on. Even soybeans, you don't know, are you eating them yourself? You're eating the soybeans as an alternative to meat, or are the soybeans being grown to feed cattle? that's an issue in South America, and that's destroying the rainforests. Anyway, I've been talking for too long, so let me ask another question, or rather, let me pose another question. Let me just, I'm interested to see, yes, fantastic. The number of participants has actually grown. It's 32, so fantastic. Let's have a look. What are the challenges that local independent shops are currently facing? Sam, you should know something about that.
You'd hope so. Yeah, thanks. A good question. I mean, I tried to touch on it a little bit with some of my my previous kind of answers. I think one thing that we see, and we've seen this, our kind of point in the market, so to speak, is people who have an idea and want to test that and try it out. And it's bizarre because we're seeing it now from the other side of that, where we've got businesses that have their own premises, permanent premises, that are now wanting to move back from a kind of like fixed permanent lease into a 1-year lease, for instance, which is the most that we offer our businesses, which is really interesting. And it seems that there's something quite inherent, I think, with the kind of typical model of how independent businesses are formed. That often it's quite a lengthy and quite a substantial commitment. You know, a lot of the times people, certainly in local areas, would like to set something up. And there's a few things really, and certainly things that I can relate to. One is about adequate levels of funding that's available to set things up. You know, and that's preferably on much lower risk basis. You know, it's that doesn't mean that there isn't, you know, due diligence, so to speak. There isn't exhaustive questions. It's not about giving away free money, but I think about trying to create pots of money where people don't have to risk, you know, their house and all challenges in that regard. So trying to create upfront and accessible funding. I think, as I've already touched on, I think there's got to be more of a relationship between the landlord and tenant. So I think there needs to be more opportunities for more flexible lease arrangements. There's got to be certainly much more flexible opportunities in terms of whether that be shorter term, whether it be based on turnover type rents, because clearly rents and rates, business rates, are a major issue for a lot of businesses, and they can take up, you know, a lot of the revenue straight away, really, just staying open. And ultimately, we want our high streets to be a reflection of a real range of things. You know, we want retail to, you know, we don't want just Amazon and the rest of it to kind of dominate the whole market as high streets in local town centres and etc. crumble and become vacant. We want it to be such a, you know, a flourishing of different things, that the whole point about the city, the town, is about people being able to come together. And I know that COVID obviously poses some very real challenges and immediate challenges to it, but I would say that you know, trying to create meaningful opportunities. You know, councils, I think we are sat on public land, we're sat on council land, and we only exist because the local council, and I know they don't get everything right, far from it, decided to take the punt that 20 commercial spaces are available really to whatever we want, you know, them to be for. And that is, you know, there's commercial imperatives that need to weigh up. People need to be able to pay rents and all the rest of it. But I think there's ways that we can structure things that are totally new and different to how things set up, that make it, you know, if we reduce that risk a lot, I really believe, and I've seen it firsthand, you know, we've had 16 businesses in the last couple of years that have started here and are now in permanent units who have got that because they've been able to test a concept out without any knowledge that it was going to succeed or not. And I think that's the great thing about startup business, is it's got to be, you know, there are a lot of risks, there's a lot of challenges involved in that. But if we can try and provide some financial support to these individuals, if we can try and give flexibility to creating things, and not that the ramifications of failure shouldn't be that much of a negative. They shouldn't be, you know, the worst thing in the world. They should be the opportunity for somebody to have a go at something, and for that not to be crippling if it doesn't work. So yeah, I hope that's partly answered that question.
Great stuff. Ida, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think one of the most immediate issues that at least the people that I'm working with who run local independent shops is proximity. And it's like, do you have access to the audiences and the people who are going to be purchasing from you? Because people aren't traveling as much, people won't necessarily be going through kind of train stations. So these simple things where you might be paying higher rent, like Sam was talking about, for proximity to those people and those audiences have disappeared. One of the key challenges that I see a lot of like local and independent shops facing is a mix of just how do we get word out to people who don't necessarily know we exist here. But also, if companies have done that successfully, it's how do we sustain this? So rather than having a weekend where everyone's like, cool, we're going to buy from you, how can we make this a sustainable, regular feature and get these people as regular customers?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I'm sort of running 2 independent shops, so definitely know a bit about this issue. So obviously, the big threat is the internet and sales going over to internet businesses. And there's the threat of the high streets in many towns becoming less and less busy. But I'd like to just be a bit positive about it and put another point of view, and that is that independent businesses do largely seem to be doing better than large chains at the moment, and there is an awareness that amongst more and more of an awareness amongst people that they'd like to shop with independent shops, and they're fed up with the products in big chains that are available everywhere. They want something a little bit more interesting. So I think that's an opportunity for independent shops. So it's got a lot to do with the products that you're selling and also the attitude that you take as an independent retailer. So shared earth shops are doing quite well at the moment. And it's because I think that there is a greater awareness of climate change in particular, and we're trying to tackle climate change, and that ties in with what consumers are looking for. So they'll come to us and maybe they'll spend more than they would do otherwise, or they'll buy different kinds of products that they wouldn't otherwise. So it's partly the products we're selling, and it's partly the attitude that we're taking. So it's good for us as a business, and it's good for the planet generally to be running on ethical lines. So that's how I would say this, just to give a bit of hope for independent retailers. One other thing, if you look around, I'm amazed at the number of zero waste shops that have started all over the place. It's almost like a new movement. There's one near I live in what you would think is a fairly rundown part of York, and it's just a sort of local shopping centre with maybe about 10 shops, and there's a zero waste gift shop there, and it seems to be doing very well, apart from being closed because of COVID, of course. So anyway, that's a little bit of hope for independent shopkeepers who are worrying. Another question. This is a nice one. What will it take to break us out of the consumer society mental attitude we've been brought up in, to change what we value, to understand what happiness really is, to know change is possible? So that's a pretty wide-ranging question. What do you think to that one, Sam?
If you're going to go to me there first, Jeremy, I thought I could have a few seconds to think. I think the crux of that question I agree with, which is that I don't personally think that happiness can or will be fulfilled by a growing amount of consumerism. And I think I was hopeful and still hold out some hope that despite all the tragedy of the last kind of year or so, that it's maybe forced people to ask different questions of their own lives and what they want from the world, from their lives. And I think that that this maybe forces us into a question in terms of our, what kind of places we want to live in. Do we want our high streets to be vacant and dead and derelict, or do we want them to be thriving and full of things that are going on? Do we want our cities and towns to be known and dominated for very mediocre, generic, uninspiring retailers that are based on, national chains, pension funds, all the rest of it? Or do we want them to be, growth settings for change and for things that make things happen? And I don't think that consumerism is going to be the unlocking key of that future. You mentioned the point, Jeremy, in terms of shared earth and in terms of independent businesses benefiting because they are appealing to much more conscious customers now that understand the impact on the planet more than they ever did. And I think that happiness is a concept is delivered by relationships. It's delivered by people creating meaningful connections between one another. And I think there's only so much that consumerism will ever deliver on that. And it's a fallacy if people think that consumerism will ever do more than just fulfill a kind of short-term pleasure type thing. Happiness is much more embedded than that, and it is much more meaningful. So, and I think ultimately the environments we create around us are what will really create that concept of what happiness looks like. And for me, retail definitely plays a strong role in that. High streets play a strong role in bringing people together and fulfilling needs, in creating community hubs and spaces where people can go, where they can build relationships and connections. But I don't think that consumerism itself will be the solution to that. And I think that the sooner that we move on from that as a kind of understanding that will fulfill happiness, it is there to, it does something, but I don't think it achieves happiness. And the sooner that we admit that, the sooner we can kind of get on with the conversation, and a much wider conversation about what that looks like. But I think just buying more, as we've seen with the impact that has on the planet, will never be the answer.
Great. So, Ida, I'll read out the question again because it was, this is not really fair. 1, 2, 3, 4 questions. But I'll read it out again because it's quite complicated. What will it take to break us out of the consumer society mental attitude we've been brought up in? To change what we value, to understand what happiness really is, to know change is possible?
So I want to agree with Sam and say that I don't think consumerism itself is going to be the answer to this. But I think what Sue's asking is kind of how can we take that step away from thinking that our purchases are going to fulfill our every need. I think a big part of that is just realizing that everyone's trying to sell something to you and figuring out whether it's something that you want to buy into or not. And it's not even I don't think it's a mental attitude of like how people have been brought up or like what we've been brought up into. It's a society that's been constructed to make as much money as possible. So once you take a step back and say, okay, cool, I don't want to be spending my money in that kind of way. What do I need? What are my basic needs? Then we can talk about ethical consumerism. But I think the key to this separation is understanding that however we spend our money, it's not going to come from that. It needs to be what Sam was saying, is like those relationships, those communities. Like when we were talking about the high streets, it's like it's been miserable walking down a fully shuttered high street. But then when you have situations where there's people floating around, I think the library is a great example because it's one of the only places left where you can spend hours of the day, but you're not required to spend any money. And it's just like, how can you create more of these pockets within society where you're not being viewed as a consumer or a producer, but you're just being viewed as a person, as a member of a community, and you can provide something beyond the kind of financial gain that someone can get from you.
Thank you, Ida. Well, as I said, it's a pretty wide-ranging question, this, and I'm not sure if I feel qualified to answer. How do we become happy? This is almost like a philosophical question. So with regard to consumerism, all I can say is that I don't know the people that I've known who've been most happy have not been particularly bothered about material things. They've been concerned about being a better person, how to make the world better, and things that relate very much to choices they make in their lives and how they are as consumers. And that's what ethical consumerism is about. It's about helping other people and helping the planet and so on. But to answer this all these questions, we could talk about them for hours and hours and still not have any result. So let's leave it at that for the moment and move on to another question. What makes an organisation ethical? Sam.
Good question. I'll try and answer it very succinctly. I think it comes from the very DNA of what that company's there to do. You know, we set out to be a community interest company from the start and not to have shareholders and not to, which was a rubber stamp really of our intentions moving forward. In practice, you know, there's many challenges that people face in business and things, you know, you can be knocked from left to right with different things that you try and do. I think it's about creating frameworks and dialogue and conversation between businesses, but really an overarching framework of what we expect our businesses to do and what we expect, therefore, our ethics to look like. Now, you know, one thing that we found is the most effective tool is just in absolute clarity, whether that be with the businesses that we work with or ourselves as a business, in terms of what that expectation looks like. What do we want from that? And that we can kind of understand is about respecting and promoting and encouraging the people you work with, giving them opportunities. It's about making sure that what you do is in alignment with the planet. And it's also making sure that you understand and take part in the broader civic conversation and civic activity that's taking place as part of the community. Companies, to be ethical for me, need to engage with, they need to partner with charities, community groups, and they need to be involved in that. And I think by doing that, certainly for the luxury, if you like, the position I'm in, we can incentivize and choose businesses that we work with that have to adhere to those things and have to set those principles. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to answer it within any longer of time, but I think having very clear and clarified principles that we have to adhere to, where possible, rewarding those that can do that, and ultimately opening that conversation up and not expecting everybody to be an expert at these things. By God, I'm not. I think it's about understanding, you know, we're going to approach different people at different stages of this conversation. And it's about making that as inclusive as possible and allowing people to be vulnerable and be honest in that and be aware about their shortcomings and you know, working together to try and improve collectively. There's a lot of stuff about individual solutions, individual actions, which is important. But for me to create bigger change, we have to work much broader and in a much more inclusive fashion, and to work with people that disagree with us, don't talk to us much about things. And that is what will create greater change and what will make more ethical forms of business the common thing.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Ida, you've got not very long. What do you think?
I'll take 30 seconds. But just to echo what Sam's saying, I think the most part of an ethical business is that you're considering the ethics in the first place and you're respecting the people who you're selling to, the people who you're working with. Every single person at every stage of that production is being respected. So I think that's, and the environment, like those are the things that underline whether you're an ethical business or not. Jeremy, I feel like you also have an answer.
Oh, well, I was hoping that you would go on until I wouldn't have to answer that question. I think it's there's a danger in saying you're an ethical company and you become a bit arrogant and then you start behaving in an unethical way. That's one comment I would make. So there are all kinds of ways of being ethical. If you pay your bills on time, that's ethical. So it's not sort of easy to say this company is ethical and this one isn't. So I suppose that's what I would say. But some of us are trying to do more to combat global warming, create more equality amongst the world's people, fight against injustice, and so on. And so I suppose it's everyone has to make their own decision about whether they think an organisation is ethical or not. But those are some of the things that I would say need to be included when you consider that question. So it's, according to my computer, it's 2:01, and we should have finished a minute ago. So I'm wondering, are we still on air?
We are indeed. Thank you, Jeremy. It just remains for me to say thank you so much again to all of our panel, to you, Jeremy, to Ida, and to Sam for taking part today. And of course, to all of our guests for their many questions as well. As I said, our next event, we will have live networking where our guests have the opportunity to talk to each other as well as to give their views to the panel. So please do look out for those on the University of York for Home pages. And we look forward to joining you again soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.